Let me introduce the panel. We have Mr. Arvind Sharma, partner at Shardul Amarchand Mangaldas, Ms. Bhuna Anand, who's the director for research at Center for Civil Society, Sir Vikram Sood, co-founder Hungry Wheels, and Mr. Devendra Kumar Singh, Development Commissioner, MSME and Additional Secretary, Ministry of MSME, Government of India. And to steer the panel through the various nuances of EODB, we have Manish Sabharwal, Chairman Team Leads Services and a very valuable contributor to the MSME National Task Force. Manish, over to you, and look forward to this panel.
Thank you. Thanks, Madan. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to be here. Welcome to everybody. It looks like an interesting mix we have. We have one entrepreneur, one professional, one researcher, and one person from the government whom I will ask to go last so that you can respond to everybody else. I think the challenge for any thinking about ease of doing business is at its heart about thinking about entrepreneurship, right? Insurgents versus incumbents. The incumbents actually complexity of ease of doing business goes up with size, goes up with headcount, goes up with geographic expansion, and goes up with sectors. So actually, at a certain level, ease of doing business in India is easiest for MSMEs. But obviously, big companies are able to cope with the regulatory cholesterol, let me call it that. You know, I have 150 guys in regulatory affairs whose only job is compliance. And I think that that is not fair to me as an employer. But today we'll sort of divide the panel into hopefully 3 parts, 20 minutes for everybody to sort of give their comments and we'll ask them their perspective. 20 minutes, I will ask questions based on what was said in the first 20 minutes. And then 20 minutes, we can have questions in the end. So I'll ask the entrepreneur Vikram to sort of go first. Do you even, what would you define as sort of ease of doing business, and how would you think about ease of doing business in terms of your own growth and your own sort of challenges? As an entrepreneur, that would be a nice sort of opening perspective for all of us to hear.
Very good morning. I've been an entrepreneur for a decade. The current venture that I'm doing is essentially providing mobile restaurants, which is kitchens on wheels, as a service. So it's mobile restaurants as a service. And let me start by saying, based on my personal experience of having built automotive part of my business and the services part of my business, we essentially come across multiple departments of the government for every part of our compliance. And based on my experience, I know the government is trying hard, and I know they are trying to catch up fast. But as an entrepreneur, I'm not building a technology company or an app-based business. What I'm building is a physical business. And all I can say is, ye dil mange mo. And what I expect from the government is a whole host of things which on ground translate policies into actions. And why do I say this? Coming to the challenges that at least I have figured out, because prior to starting my own MSME, I used to consult MSMEs on growth and scale. And there are 3 stages that I or any Make in India startup, and by Make in India, I mean physical Make in India. I'm not talking about a technology or a digital business, which is a very different dynamic and ease of business associated with it. The 3 discoveries are essentially discovery, discovery, discovery. So the first discovery that you do is, what's the complete list of compliances applicable? When will they be applicable? Some are applicable every quarter, some are applicable every month, some are applicable over and over again. The second thing is discovery of all the approving authorities. So associated checklists, how many times will a compliance or a labor person come to your factory? How many times do you have to file a employment tax? Can you not file it quarterly? Why does it have to be filed monthly? Can you do it after in some cases, we have had cases where an employee has left middle of the month and we are still paying tax. So there are many small things like this which I could get into. The third aspect, which I think especially applies to us at Hungry Wheels, is the discovery of how many times will the same compliance be approved. And I have 2 stark examples that we have gone through a lot of pain on. Our mobile restaurants essentially are new vehicle clubs. They come under the Central Motor Vehicle Act, which is a central government act. But in spite of meeting all requisite standards, the same compliance will be needed 3 times again. It's again from every state government. It's again from every transport commissioner. It's again from every RTO commissioner. So I have once met a central norm, and then I have to do it 3 times in every state, in every city, and every city is RTO commissioner. And there is nothing painless or easy about that. Number two, the second example that we have realized. So once we comply with all this, we also comply with city corporation laws, right? We have electric kitchen to ensure that there is no safety issues, there are no fire issues, it's completely flameless. So we have complied with one city corporation's laws. And every city corporation wants us to go through the entire process again and again. So the magnitude of me trying to grow as an MSME is I have one nation, I have 30 states, I have 400 plus cities which are potential target audiences. Why can't there be one policy for one nation and one license? We have a company identification number, which any state government will accept. If I have complied with a central law, which applies as a motor vehicle act, which applies to all roads in the country, why can't we have a one nation, one license policy for things where it is applicable? I understand in some cases it may not be, where it's a state subject. But at a central level, if you are complying, it should be a one nation, one license. The second thing is, there are numerous examples where the government has done this. I mean, the latest one is a one nation, one ration card. I mean, if at citizenship level, it can be eased down at a policy level to that extent. I'm sure we are also doing a very large social project in the middle of COVID, which we call Jeevan Rath, where we are providing relief on wheels to almost a couple of lakhs of people that have migrated out of Maharashtra, MP, Gujarat, including arranging trains and buses to get people home. And I can see that that thing is working now that they're coming back or they've traveled back home. And it's phenomenal to watch the pain point being taken off a migrant. So that is what I experienced as challenges. Now, the impact it has had on us and our customers, in ensuring we are compliant, it has costed us time. We have taken 4 years more than planned. It has costed us money. It has costed us 4x more than we planned as capital investment. It has costed us personally, and personally, nobody ever calculates in entrepreneurs like Manish. It has costed us 100 times more than any tech company will take to go to market. The pain of seeing your investors wait for returns, the pains to see your family wait for returns, the pains to yourself see any returns, just because you are having to jump through the same hoop many, many times over. And imagine the negative impact. I have worked across the globe. I'm a fairly active person on social media, and I write publicly about it, right? Including my peers, startup founders, investors have heard the person's story of how painful it is to make something. How am I going to be able to mentor somebody young who comes to me and say, why don't you make something rather than make an app, right? Why don't you manufacture something rather than write some code? At 40, I've been able to sustain it, right? And I've been able to last it out to a point where going to market. But a younger mind will say, I don't need to deal with this. Let's make an app. It's zero headache. And frankly, that's what's happening, right? Which is why there is an app for everything. And this invisible, and I understand there are frameworks, but on ground, it does not translate. And we have, I mean, internally, we have a term for it. We call it POPD. It's the pain of doing business, right? It's associated very strongly with making, manufacturing, or creating anything which is physical in India. If you go meet anybody who's an old manufacturer, he does not want his son or his next generation to get into manufacturing until unless he's crossed a certain threshold in terms of it. And
okay,
if we are,
so shall we come back? I thought we'd do 5
Yeah.
minutes opening remarks because there's a lot that we want to come back to you on.
Yeah,
So maybe I'll ask Bhuvna to sort of build in what Vikram's view from the trenches, which is clearly a reality, but how do we, as a researcher, we all instinctively, at least as entrepreneurs, believe that if ease of doing business was made easy, then India would have many more companies at scale and you would have many more formal entrepreneurs. Is that true in your view as a researcher? And maybe you can comment a little bit on Vikram's problem that all of us have who have operations in 29 cities, right? I mean, or 29 states and 500 cities, that there is a state government and there is a center. I have operations in 5,000 cities. So there is sometimes, you know, Indira Gandhi used to say in 7 of her speeches that strong states lead to a weak nation. Right, but N.T. Ramarao, as Chief Minister, said the central government is a conceptual myth. It is the Chief Ministers who run India, right? So I think both those extreme views are wrong. We will need Chief Ministers and we need a central government. But unfortunately, people like us in the middle of the road get hit by trucks from both sides, So, both of them don't care about the other person's perspective. So, as a researcher, do you think that there's a clear connection between ease of doing business and formality? And second is, how do we handle this center versus state or local versus sort of universal?
Great to be here. Thank you for that, Vikram. Of course, I learned a ton just from listening to your experiences as well. As a researcher, we have this sort of interesting conundrum, right? How do you measure the ease of doing business? What am I looking for? And of course, Manish at Team Leads and Avantis, you'll have done a phenomenal job of just giving us some of these numbers to work with, right? And that's what we call the de jure sort of understanding of what does it take. As a researcher, my obsession is what does this actually mean on the ground? Not just on the ground, but not by individual experience, but at the margins, right? For most people, what does this mean and how do I know what this means? So I sort of want to take a couple of examples and stories from our own research, just to sort of emphasize the importance of this de jure versus de facto, and maybe that sheds some light on why it is hard to scale. What is the language of the law or the rule, and how does it play out, right? So I'll give you an example. Take Delhi Municipal Corporation Act. Of course, Vikram referred to these Municipal Corporation Acts. Anyone living in Delhi should know that all chicken that is available from your local butcher is illegal under Section 4072, right? Let this just sink in for a minute. What the government says is that you can only sell or you can only buy or consume meat that is available from a government municipal run slaughterhouse. In effect, this means that all sort of small butcheries are illegal. Essentially, there is a board outside this giant slaughterhouse that says that we only do big animals, we don't do small animals. So irrespective of the conversation about whether chicken is good to eat or what it does for the environment, just think about the how do you navigate this? If you are a small butcher working in, say, Malviya Nagar or Begumpur or any of these small hubs in Delhi, how do you scale? What happens to you? Because at the entry, even if you were registered with the trade license or with the shops and establishments license, your business is illegal, right? So if I wanted to become a larger butchery, have 2 shops, 3 shops, 4 shops, what would I do? And how would I navigate now this impossible sort of miasma, right? Between center, state, municipal, so on and so forth. So that's one part of the sort of challenge. Take another example at the central, emerging from a central law, which is all of you are probably familiar with the Legal Metrology Act, right? And the state and the local governments then enforce. It's just simply saying that is a consumer able to get the measure that he was promised? And it ties into excise really nicely, because if you're running a restaurant selling alcohol, you've got these fixed measures. Legal metrology guys come in and they say, oh, we're going to do a double pour. And plus minus 5 is the room that you have to default. So it just becomes a money-making act, right? So these are the ways in which you're finding that the law and the actual implementation of the law, something goes wrong in translation because there is a lack of understanding of what is the objective we are trying to meet with such and such. So as a researcher, we've been keeping our eyes open to try and understand what is going on and to try and unpack this, right? So my sense of it is that there is a lot of evidence that has been collected around the world on different sort of legal systems or legal requirements and how they are sort of an impediment to scale. I think there's a phenomenal phrase that has found currency in the last few years. I think, Manish, you had something to do with this, which is the dwarfs to babies, right? I think this is one of the most evocative and succinct descriptions I have seen. And the economic survey previously has also done a phenomenal job of being able to show this relationship. There is a missing middle, and one can apply sort of reasonable intuition as well as reasonable experience that we've all been watching, that there is a relationship. And I think that's something that I'm a little bit more tenuous on. On the question of, sort of center versus states and one nation, one license and so on and so forth, I am actually a votary of decentralization. My sense is that you want to encourage rather than to say that 30 days is a good benchmark for, say, registering an enterprise. You want to be able to see states compete for 25 days, 23 days, 22 days, right? We want it days upwards for better outcomes rather than a rate. That being said, there are two examples that I want to use for this. One is an example that applies to nano entrepreneurs, not even those who qualify as MSMEs, right? Largely informal, largely unregistered. Say your street vendors, say your istriwalas around it, around the block, and so on and so forth. For a long time, the center nudged states and said, listen, why don't you do something to make their lives a little bit easier, right? Bring protection, for the lack of a better word, get them out of this hafta racket, extortion racket that is run, get them out of it by guaranteeing certain protections, by guaranteeing that you will register them, that you will accept them. It took about 20 years, and no state would make a move towards. I mean, a few states passed some policy, and eventually the center had to say, forget it, nobody is taking it on, and so they passed the national. That being said, now we are also seeing the labor regulations, right, which are deeply centralized. And for a long time, some states, even if they wanted to, have not been able to move on this. Only with COVID, you're seeing that states are saying, look, we want to modify and change the behavior. So it is not clear to me that the center is a sort of prescription of the right approach. I think on different subjects, the approach should and will differ. That being said, you do want to think a little bit beyond sort of the targets that we have trained our eyes on. Number of days, number of documents, number of processes. These are necessary, but my worry is that they are far from sufficient, and you need to start a serious dialogue on the substance.
That's a great place for me to sort of ask Arvind to come in. Maybe Arvind, if you can within 5 minutes or less, just give us your opening sort of views on sort of as a professional services firm, right? You see things a little differently, and you know, how can this be done? Or, I mean, we often say the government should do something, but can it do something? I mean, you don't want Delhi to be telling states what to do. We are a democracy. You don't want, courts have their own opinions. So there are 4 or 5 people around the table, and everybody has a valid voice. So a voice. The question is, if anybody can say no and nobody can say yes, then every ease of doing business initiative is doomed to fail. So how do we find consensus? Because we'll never find unanimity.
Sure. Thanks, Manish, and Vikram and Bhuvna have shared some really insightful thoughts. And it was very interesting for me as somebody who's in legal drafting to understand concerns which need to be borne in mind when we do further things which are relevant in the context. But I must tell you, these conversations that we are having today, or the inputs that we are receiving from public forums, is definitely that there needs to be simplified legislation. But we live in a very complicated constitutional framework, so to say, right? There is empowerment at various levels, and it was objective in the sense that when we started, evolving as a democracy and a nation, we had to provide empowerment at the center, which was the nucleus of the growth. It had to be supplemented with efforts at the state levels, and there were municipal and even micro level enabling structures which were put in place. And we somehow got used to it. We somehow believed that that is the norm we need to follow. But interestingly, like recently I was having a conversation with the legislative team. They said, we need a 2-page legislation. I said, wow, you have a 40-page legislation. How do you intend to bring it down to 2? He said, you need to get my sentiment. I said, sir, with due regards, I accept what you say. As we started to draft it, we had to provide for categories, special demographics, special what all and what not. So it led into complicated drafting. So one thing that I see is that, yes, we have a very diverse situation which needs to be accommodated, but that without denying the fact that there's a lot of simplicity which is needed in the process. Conscious efforts are being made by government as a lawyer to make simpler legislations, maintain uniformity in applicable for various stakeholders, And from time to time, revisions are being made to remove legislations which are redundant, or we call it as the weeding out process, right? We are also seeing laws adopt evolution, economic evolution, and the kind of contemporary opportunities which are around us. And in this effort, conscious efforts are being made to align and reduce the multiplicity of regulators. That's one thing that we're trying to achieve. And secondly, what we're trying to achieve is also we're trying to avoid too much of an interference by the government. I was recently, participating in the commercial coal mine auction launch by the Prime Minister. The clear message or the requirement by the industry was, please don't regulate us. We would like to be in discipline. And if we fail our discipline, then you have all the powers and empowerment to penalize us. What Bhuvna just mentioned about the recent legislation on the legal metrology is a step in that direction. People are saying that we don't want to be frightened about imprisonment. We live in a commercial world, right? Let's speak about what penalty you need to pay and be reasonable, because we don't make non-compliances where it's avoidable. It's just a matter of situation that we are in, right? So we are trying to simplify, decriminalize, and we are making progressive legislations. If you see the recent notifications that SEBI has been issuing, or the recent notifications that are being issued under the Companies Act, there is a lot adopting to reality, and which I see is a progressive thing. But yes, there's a long way to go. There's a lot of baggage that we have. We need to be more sophisticated in the legislative drafting that we do. Also, one challenge, or we do a lot of overseas transactions, both inbound and outbound. And what we see is that people fail to understand or appreciate what is the problem in the Indian legal system, right? If they ask us to, like I had an assignment where we were asked to speak about food processing or sale of food products throughout the country. And believe me, I was myself astonished by the kind of compliances that we ended up writing, right from, how many times you need to get your manufacturing facility whitewashed and what all notifications you have to put. And they said that, really, is this all that we're going to be doing? I said, it's not difficult, but it is a tick box that you need to ensure that you have ticked off, right? So, yes. And people, today are, when we are looking into ease of doing business, which is one of the focuses of the present government, we seem to be making lots of progress in terms of our ranking. But the devil is in the detail of implementation, right? We make nice legislations, but somewhere the implementation is compromised. I don't think you need these comprehensive legislations if you implement what you have very strongly already, right? Now, there are Prevention of Corruption Acts, and there are legislations which are promulgated to specifically deal with particular criminal offenses. We have all of it in your IPC and CRPC, and it is good enough, right? You need to just implement. The key is in implementation. You can have.
Shall I come back? Shall I come back to you on that question then? So if you could, Mr. Singh, I just wanted to get your responses to what all three of them said. With just if you could cover two things for us, would be very interesting. Besides, obviously, the MSME perspective is that, Arvind just ended with something that, well, it's not difficult, but it's just a checklist. So a lot of people I have heard sometimes say that this is a thorn in the flesh. It is not a dagger in the heart. Why don't you just get it over with, and why don't you sort of deal with it? So I think it's not a thorn in the flesh. I think it's a dagger in the heart, but I would love to get your take. And second is with the recognition that obviously MSME is one of 57 ministries and the central government is one of 29 governments. This is a horizontal in a government that is organized vertically. So how do we get something done when every ministry or every department or every state has a valid jurisdiction and looks at things only from their perspective? So I think that is at the heart of this challenge. One of Akira Kurosawa's most interesting movies was a movie called Rashomon, where 4 people watch a murder and all 4 describe it differently based on where you stand on an issue depends on where you sit. And obviously, Ministry of MSME sits in a horizontal position compared to, say, the Ministry of Environment, which is a vertical, or Ministry of Finance, which is a vertical. So just to take your thing, is ease of doing business a real problem, and how can we solve it?
Yeah, thank you. And good afternoon, everybody. And it is really pleasure to listen to all of you. Last time I listened Mr. Manish during my phase 5 in Missouri 2 years back or 3 years back. So it was really a pleasure and to know you that time. Actually, yes, these are very valid points. All the speakers and you are also raising. And uh, what ease of doing business our ministry would like to push, and to start with ourselves, we have now started a process of Udyam registration. It is a new process based on the new definition because the criteria of classification of micro, small and medium has changed. So a new process we have adopted. So this process is paperless, and there is no fee at to be paid for this registration. It is based on Aadhaar and PAN registration, and we are just asking certain fields to be filled up. We are not asking any document. You have to earlier there used to be a process to upload documents also. Now there is no uploading of documents. But of course, we are linking our system with the system of the CBDT, PAN database, and also GSTN, so that we get the fields what we are interested in from these two government sources, so that the things will be smooth and there should not be any paperwork. Now, and then there are other processes also in our ministry where we give some subsidy or some incentives. Those are also on an online platform, and it is administered and tracked in a digital mode. We have also a champions portal where MSMEs, they can lodge their complaints, and this portal also get the grievances from the central grievances portal also. It is linked with that portal. And we are able to address many issues. I will not say that 100%, but yes, but most of the issues are relating to finance. That banks are not giving money. I am going and issue relating to collateral, or if I require only 5 lakhs loan, and entire house has to be mortgaged, which is costing 20 lakhs. So those issues are there. But the thing is that everybody is trying. All ministries are trying to bring simplicity in thought process, simplicity in the execution, and most of the datas are now talking to each other. So there is a message exchange based on API or some, either on daily basis or maybe weekly basis or monthly basis. Data can be interchanged, and so that you have a better picture of the things what is happening. Now India is a very vast country. We have a federal structure, and also we have 3 tier of governance. Local bodies are also there, because the first speaker spoke about one nation, one policy. That is required, but the real challenge comes in implementation. You have to take a building permit. Now that building permit has to be given by the local body, either a municipality or a corporation or a panchayat. So they are actually, they have their own set of guidelines, and then compliance sometimes becomes difficult. And in each state, there is a state level ease of doing business committee also, where all the secretaries, sit in that committee. 2 months back, I was in Kerala and I was sitting every month in those committee. But then the issue was linked to the land. What is the nature of land? Is it agricultural land, or is it, who is the owner of that land? So all those issues are not in the process fully digitized. It is not 100% digitized. So you have to write letters, then you have to wait for the communications, and it takes a lot of time, and many issues may not be able to be sorted out in a very simple and desired way. So, but these are the ground realities we accept. But yes, everybody is trying to work in those, all the states, government and the central government. Now, the second, actually, the thing is that, you said about coordination, how you coordinate with the different ministries. Now, these requests are coming from different associations that MSME ministry should push their cause, even if it is lying in some other ministry. So yes, it requires a lot of pushing their issues if we are convinced about their need, and we do take up. At the level of the policy formulation, there is a mechanism in which there is a consultation. Our ministry is also involved. We give our input, and we try to safeguard the interest of MSME, based on input we are getting from the associations, or every day we are getting many letters. Everybody has good suggestions. We take note of that and we try to incorporate in the policy framework. Now, the issue relating to finance, we have to go to the finance, of course. We are working on a fund of fund scheme, so we have to go to the DA and the finance ministry. Subordinate dates, we have to go to the finance ministry to take their concurrence. And but now the good thing is that now everybody is concerned about MSA, and they are bringing MSME in their policy framework also. So they are trying to understand, yes, this is a one segment where government is trying to focus. Second, it is a very important segment. Their issues needs to be considered and discussed and sorted out, because earlier you only take big projects. Everybody focus on the big projects, railway or roads or hydel and power and all. But yes, there are smaller things. And now good thing is that everybody is talking about it, about agriculture, rural industrialization, agricultural exports, and exports of the MSME. So that synchronization of different policy is taking place, and it will take place ultimately. It will take place. It may take little time. And there are many points which is breaking. We cannot say that it is not breaking, but one by one, government is trying to addressing, and we are trying to have that. But it is a very complex one. It is a very complex one. Yesterday I was talking to one gentleman from Bombay, and he was saying, why don't you capture the different trades who are in the field, the services industries, and there was a suggestion to capture the entire thing. Then I asked, if we capture, what to do next? The moment I say that all the carpenters of the India should register on my portal, after registration, there will be some expectation. So what kind of things we are trying to do and what government can deliver? This is because 6.6 crore MSMEs are there as per the our NSO survey, but the real registration is only 1 crore on our Udyam portal, which was there, and now it will be migrating to the new portal. So only 1 crore are registered in our portal. So there is a need to bring more and more people on the registration system so that we get a sense. We get a sense about their location, because once we realize what are the locations, you can develop supply chain, and we can work in the clusters. We are trying to focus to work in the clusters so that we can have a maximum impact. Last, just I would like to say that we have a consultation process. We call it advisory committee in MSME. There are 3 industry members in that. MSME Forum, then Laghu Bharati, and then MSME Federation. And there are 4 state governments in that committee. So there are many complex issues. We convene the committee and take their input, so that everybody feels that yes, they have been heard at least. And most of everybody talks sense actually, and we find about 80% of the issues, everybody has that same view. So it is very difficult to it is very easy to take those 80% without any further discussion. In some crucial matters, there could be divergence. For that, we discuss again and again. So, and try to build a consensus. So that way, our ministry is trying to work and improve the service delivery. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That was useful. I'm sure we all have questions, and we'll start with that. But if I may ask all three of you just follow-up questions, and maybe you can respond also and build in what others said. So let me just start with Bhuvna, your notion that this should be a race to the top, right? I think China's genius wasn't some Ayatollah in Beijing, it was 200 mayors competing for investment. So from your race to the top view, it would be that 29 chief ministers matter more than one prime minister, and maybe 100 mayors matter more than 29 chief ministers. But why don't you take the alternate view that this might end up being a race to the bottom?
Yes.
So how would you respond to people who would say that if we had 5,000 cities competing for, because I don't think labor law reform means no labor laws, right? In my mind, I've been sort of pushing for labor law reform, but I don't believe labor law reform means no labor laws. Paracelsus, he was a Renaissance physician. He used to say that dose makes the poison, right? Anything powerful enough to help has the power to hurt. So how would you respond to critics of ease of doing business saying that this will become a race to the bottom and there will be no labor laws, there will be no environmental regulations, there will be nothing left if we totally decentralize this?
I'm with you, Manish. I think that's a false binary. Right? So nobody is arguing for no minimums whatsoever. And my sense is that two things will happen. One is that the market itself. Remember that enterprises are going to be competing for labor. So it is going to be rewarding for an enterprise to themselves provide a bunch of both monetary and non-monetary funds, right? This becomes a choice that an employee also engages in. So we tend to forget that side of the equation a lot. So it's not just government and enterprise, it's also enterprise and both their customers as well as their employees. So that's one sort of thought that I have. The second is, I think our experience over the last 10 odd years tells us that it won't be a race to, anarchy, but perhaps a well-modulated and sort of also urgent response. So we can take so many examples, right? Gujarat, were a champion of the Rajasthan approach or labor laws as well. Punjab just recently passed something called the Right to Business Act, and so on and so forth. And Andhra Pradesh has done a phenomenal job on thinking through what is the computerized risk assessment for environmental as well as labor inspections, right? So it's not as if we don't have any examples where are happy to step up to the plate and say, look, I recognize we must do better. Now the question is how much of that pressure comes. It's not clear to me yet that we will get the kinds of outcomes we want. But my intuition is that without binding states, of course, many other changes need to happen. And like many panelists said, we also have a constitutional framework to work with, so it's not as if we can dump in a bag. We do, however, need to take this question of empowered mayors more seriously, because that is an entirely different.
Okay. So let me ask Vikram to come in. Where Vikram, you sort of felt that I want one approval from Delhi to be valid all across the country. Would you really want that? What if you get stuck with a cranky person in Delhi, and then suddenly, I mean, at least you can go to 29 chief ministers and get started, right? So this we all wish for an Ayatollah, but usually an Ayatollah isn't Lee Kuan Yew, it's Mugabe, right? At least that's the way the world works, right? History suggests that, right? So I'll be careful what you wish for. How do you think about this?
So while I wish for what I am asking for now, when I started the business, I actually took the counter approach. When I came up with the idea, I was in Bombay. The first option was to set up the manufacturing in Pune, Pimpri Chinchwad. I got fairly strong advice not to set it up there because of huge labor issues. Like, okay, no problem. Hometown is Bangalore, so I could come back to Bangalore and set up a business. As we looked at the entire framework available in the automotive cluster, which is a location called Hosur, we realized the kind of OEM network we needed, and it's like 100+ OEM network, right? The OEM network we needed in order to make the vehicle was not available. The last resort is every time I have to go to my plant, I have to drive 500 kilometers to Sri Perumbudur. So, and the primary reason was the kind of inspector compliance needed is actually self-explanatory. They'll come and say, why don't you do it as a self-declaration? If you deviate when we audit, we'll have a problem and you'll have a problem. But till then, we assume trust. There is no trust deficit. What you are declaring is what we accept, right? Now, that's on the initial bit where I set up the plant. Now, as I scale, and the journey is two-part, right? And now as I scale, while I have finished all my compliances, which are national, my thing was what is nationally applicable should be nationally implemented.
Okay.
That's
okay.
So the difference.
That's a good point. Yes, yes, those points. So Arvind, you made a point about this being very complex or this being very complicated, right? You know, the Constituent Assembly, the 299 remarkable people who wrote our Constitution, some of the most interesting parts of the debate were the distinction between fundamental rights and directive principles, right? Where they recognize that you can't give education, you can't, let's make promises we can't, not make promises we can't keep, right? So between must have and nice to have, there was a nice distinction, right? But I don't think, would you agree that our compliance regime today does not make a distinction between must have, which is a few non-negotiables, and lots of must haves which drown out even the nice to haves, which drown out even the must haves, or that's not possible?
No, that definitely is possible, Manish, and that should be the trend. We need to remember that we have lived in what has been the Inspector Raj. We have moved away from that position, right? But we will have to distance our history appropriately, right? Vikram and Bhuna have raised very interesting points, but I would just want to supplement a few more in the sense that when we speak about issues which the center should deal, clearly from a policy making perspective, center reserves the ultimate right, but implementation is passed on to the lower levels. And I, as a lawyer, I don't see a conflict there, but the conflict in the intent or objective or situation at the center and state is what gaps in implementation and which causes the inconvenience. Like, for example, all of your labor laws, be it the Provident Fund gratuity or Industrial Dispute Act, they are centrally notified legislation. The government job was to notify something and pass on the implementation to the state. Today, even if the center wants, it can't really take back things which are being done by the state. So I, to that effect, see a difference in the roles that is being played. But yes, because
but you can exercise delegated powers. I mean, just because you've delegated the powers doesn't mean you can. I mean, there's enough court judgments to suggest that if you've delegated a power, you can still exercise it.
Same thing has been tested in courts, and the court said that you can do what is the removal of difficulty for removing a difficulty, right? But if you make it a habit, then you're actually prevailing over what you legitimately passed on to the states, which was a legal vesting of empowerment with the state governments, right? So I agree, and it has been there in the past, for right or wrong reasons, the removal of difficulty orders or the revocation of powers vested with the state government has happened, right? But yes, what I see as the real problem is the difference in situation between the center and the state for various reasons whatsoever, which really creates the gap. But there's no arguing to the fact that, these concerns need to be heard and they need to be creased out and resolved for facilitating business. And mind you, I have worked with very senior bureaucrats, and I have really started to respect them a lot because they go a long way in giving you what you really deserve, right? And I have seen people really burn the midnight lamp. I never knew it until I worked with them, but yes, there is a lot of effort. It's an ongoing process, so to say.
Yeah. So let me ask you, give you the last word. We're almost out of time, Mr. Singh. That, one of my biggest questions in government is how do you get something done in government after everybody who matters in government agrees with you? Right. Very few people agree with me that don't disagree that the Apprenticeship Act should not be changed. Very few people, ease of doing business is one of those issues which is a very spiritual level of agreement, right? That nobody's willing to sort of say that from tomorrow, instead of 67,000 compliances, we will have 25,000, because nobody can say it, right? Not one person cannot say that. So how do you think we should, I mean, you in your talk highlighted the credit constraints, the cluster constraints, the skill constraints, all of which are. But our narrow subject of ease of doing business, how do you think we can get this done? Because I think it is really institutional reforms, capacity building reforms, infrastructure reforms take time. Ease of doing business are flick of pen reforms. So how do you think we could actually get this done? And then we're almost out of time after that. So.
Actually, some of the states have done it now due to COVID. For example, there are certain renewals of business which has to be done every year. So now people have changed their laws and saying that renewal has to be done after 10 years. Rest we are believing that you are functioning and as per. So that trust element has increased. Similarly, there are certain things where a simple execution work. Suppose you are participating in procurement, you have to give a bank guarantee. So that bank guarantee, once you give, you may be participating in different procurement under the same agency.
Right.
Okay. So then you are giving 4 or 5 bank guarantees. Now complaints are coming to us that my work is over. Kindly release my bank guarantee. There is a clause that after 3 months this needs to be released. Now bank will not release till they get a NOC from the procurement agency or the executing agency. So this is a small thing, but this is a very pain point, because sometimes it may take 6 months, 1 year, because they are not sending any reply. So these are some of the procedural issue. One thing is about Mr. Arvind was saying about legislative. These are not legislative issues. These are procedural issues. Very small procedural issue which can be simplified. But somebody has to go into the minute details. Each and every compliance, what are the things which can be simplified. And if that exercise is done, probably it is doable at a faster pace. This is what
wonderful. Wonderful, sir. Thank you for your time. I think that it is, to my mind, it is not a mystery why 66 million enterprises only translate to 19,500 companies with a paid up capital of more than 10 crores. I think it is very hard to be a small entrepreneur. I used to be one. I'm a big entrepreneur in terms of my company's revenues now. So I have 150 people who are a cost center and they are dharti pe boj. All I do is pay their costs for compliance, but I don't think they help my company grow. So I would submit that the biggest gift we can give to small entrepreneurs is really make India a much easier place to do business. But hopefully this is an ongoing topic. The battle for ideas is being fought. It is much more. So I think it is accepted now, but we have to figure out how to make it. Thank you all for your time, sir. It was a pleasure talking with you, and look forward to being in touch.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Manish, thank you, Kay.
Thank you.
Over to you, Madan. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Manish, and thanks a lot to all of you panelists. I think it was a very invigorating discussion. Clearly shows that the ease of doing business is not easy, and there's miles to go before we sleep. Now the moot point is whether it's a dagger in the heart or a thorn in the flesh or a poke in the eye is something that we need to figure out and reduce that pain. But really appreciate the thoughts and look forward to a day when every entrepreneur can truly cross his heart and say that, listen, I'm not too intimidated by this anymore. And I think that's where we need to get to. So thank you again for your time, and look forward to working with all of you to make this a reality. Quickly to the questions before we go to the next panel. How many different types of payment does an MSME with one factory and one admin office need to make every year to the government? The correct answer is 103. About 10% of you got it right. How does the World Bank collect data for ease of doing business rankings? It's through expert and intermediary surveys, which is about 9% of you tick that answer. And as an opinion, as a small business owner, what is the one pain point you would like the government to address today? Business registrations and permission came on top. That says about 15% of you voted for that as the main bottleneck to be removed. So that just gives all of us an idea of what was going on in the minds of the audience.